I also co-lead the Inclusive Disaster Risk Management and Gender Equality thematic area. So I'm really excited to welcome you all to this event on integrating gender and social inclusion in nature-based solutions. It's been organized by GFDRR, and what we're going to do today is share some key highlights from the recently finalized guidance note on integrating gender and social inclusion in nature-based solutions. And it's been a collaborative piece of work between the Global Program on Nature-Based Solutions and our inclusive DRM team at GFDRR. We're also going to have a knowledge exchange on the importance of designing and implementing inclusive NBS programs, and then talk a bit about employment generation opportunities and project design features of NBS programs that target marginalized groups. And so if you have any questions today, I'd encourage you to please post them in the chat. We have a chat function that's active for everyone.
Well, I'm going to bribe you with rice.
Okay, well, I was just getting to that point. So as a reminder, please mute your microphones when not speaking, and turn off your cameras if you're not presenting, so that we can feature the main presenters as we go. So I'd like to now pass the microphone over to Bernice van Bronckhorst, who is our Global Director for the Urban Resilience and Land Global Practice at the World Bank, to give us some opening remarks before we turn to our panelists. Thank you, Bernice.
Great, thank you, Zoe, and thank you everyone for joining us today, this morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you're joining from what I think will be a really interesting discussion on this really key two very key areas for us, of course, at GFDRR, both the nature-based solution space, but also, of course, very much also gender and inclusion. So very nice to see how this note has brought these two pieces together. It's very relevant, of course, because our client countries are facing really an interlinked set of challenges between climate change, disasters, loss of nature, inequality, as well as, of course, continuing challenges to livelihoods and poverty reduction. And we've seen that, of course, not abating in recent years with cost of living crisis, inflation, debt, etc. Gender inequality and lack of equal opportunities for minority groups and those with disabilities are also posing real challenges for development, and addressing these disparities is really critical for achieving sustainable and inclusive development outcomes. So integrated and inclusive solutions are needed that both address the multiple challenge of disaster risk management and resilience, but also that ensure that all stakeholders are actively involved in the decision-making process. So again, absolutely critical that we bring these two pieces together. Nature-based solutions, or NBS for short, if done well, can really serve as an integrated approach to addressing climate change and development challenges that not only bring a range of benefits for vulnerable groups as active participants, but also as implementers and as beneficiaries. So the World Bank has significantly increased its investment and technical work on NBS over recent years. So just give a number, for example, the World Bank Group lending portfolio that integrates the use of NBS for reducing disaster risk over the last decade, well, 2012 to 2021, is estimated at $5.5 billion US. So it's a significant portfolio and growing rapidly, I would say. GFDR has had a leading role in enabling and informing a large share of those investments through our technical and operational work on NBS. So the global program on NBS for climate resilience is informing and enhancing the design and implementation of dozens of lending projects around the world. And as I say, very much a growing space for us. Nature-based solutions can transform populations' relationships with their surroundings. It can offer a wide range of benefits. It can create opportunities such as employment and access to green spaces. And if designed properly, they can even further and really reach those that usually fall behind in society. So well-designed nature-based solutions have the potential to create inclusive and equitable outcomes. They can generate employment opportunities, they can promote access to green spaces, I just mentioned, and they can really enhance the well-being of marginalized and vulnerable communities. So really thinking how we can put this together is critical, because this is really not automatically true. to address environmental and social challenges in a way that reaches the most vulnerable, NBS needs to take specific actions to target these populations by sort of mapping who those populations are, where they are, the constraints that limit their ability to benefit, and by creating specific and contextual processes for their participation. If we just think that this happens by itself, well, it really, really doesn't. So it's really important that, you know, practitioners do this very much in a sort of with real intent. So the guidance note that we're launching here today is really to try and help to achieve that by presenting different steps that those working on NBS can take to design and implement ambitious, equitable, and inclusive NBS projects. So, you know, projects that include climate change mitigation and adaptation, disaster risk reduction, improved water management, enhanced biodiversity conservation, and sustainable livelihood opportunities. And again, how can we, in a very deliberate way, ensure that those that are more marginalized are also included in this work? So with that, I really look forward to hearing from all our great speakers that we have lined up on the panel and to a really lively discussion on the topic. And back over to you. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you so much, Bernice. So now we're going to get started with a presentation by Laura Jungmann, who is a consultant with the Global Program on Nature-Based Solutions at the World Bank, and she's also one of the authors of the guidance note on inclusive gender and inclusive nature-based solutions guidance note. So over to you, Laura. Thank you. We saw your presentation a second ago and then it went away. So you want to try resharing?
Yes, I will share it again, making sure that you can all see my screen in full mode.
Yep, looks good.
Thank you, Zoe. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today to present this report that was written by many hands from the NBS and the Gender and Social Inclusion team of the FDRR. So just getting into the topic. So as it was already mentioned by Zoe, by Bernice, nature-based solutions, they offer sustainable, cost-effective ways to address environmental challenges. But to do that in a way that is fully inclusive, that's taking the full benefit of the socio-economic benefits, they need to take specific actions to target and actively engage populations that might be often left behind, often excluded of social processes. And this matters a lot because gender equality and social inclusions are essential components of disaster risk management and by default of NBS as well. So disaster risk management will not effectively reduce risk for everyone if the needs of vulnerable, of marginalized groups are not being considered just as much. So what this guidance note does that we're launching here is to present steps that those working on NBS, those interested in NBS, can take to design and implement ambitious, equitable, inclusive nature-based solutions projects. Today, I'm going to be presenting on some of key points that the guidance note covers, some of its recommendations and examples. The presentation is not exhaustive of all the content of the note. We really welcome you to take a look at the note after this presentation. But we've chosen a few points that we think are particularly illustrative that can contribute as food for thought for this discussion that will follow as well. Before we get started, we wanted to present a short video on nature-based solutions for those of you that may not be that familiar with the work to be fully on board before we continue.
Countries all over the world are facing increasingly complex challenges due to climate change, such as more frequent disasters, water and food insecurity, and the loss of natural resources and biodiversity. Unplanned urban growth, ecosystem degradation, and poverty are making communities even less resilient to climate shocks. To reduce climate risks, governments often embark on traditional engineering projects, such as dams, seawalls, and conventional drainage, also known as grey infrastructure. Increasingly, though, experts are turning to nature to help. Known as nature-based solutions, and sometimes called green infrastructure, These interventions use strategic protection, management, or restoration of ecosystems to address climate resilience and adaptation in cost-effective ways. NBS can help countries meet climate resilience goals while also providing benefits like recreation, biodiversity, and better water quality. Often, combining green and gray infrastructure can be more cost-effective than purely green or gray interventions. At the World Bank and Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, or GFDRR, experts across sectors are already supporting countries to leverage nature-based solutions to make communities more climate resilient. Since 2012, the World Bank has approved financing for more than 100 on-the-ground investments across almost 60 countries. For instance, in Mozambique, the World Bank, along with KfW, supported the transformation of the vital port city of Beira with a mix of critical drainage, urban parks, and stream renaturation that restored the Chiveve River's capacity to mitigate floods and created a green space that provides recreational and cultural spaces. In Colombo, the World Bank supported the protection of the city's vital wetlands and helped integrate them into the region's flood reduction systems. Now, the wetlands also provide recreational and biodiversity benefits, along with reducing flood risks. To scale up the support for projects like this, the World Bank, with the support from GFDRR and the Global Water Security and Sanitation Partnership, launched the Global Program on Nature-Based Solutions for Climate Resilience. The Global Program aims to be the expert hub for NBS at the World Bank that supports countries identify, prepare, and implement NBS for climate resilience. To learn more, visit www.naturebasedsolutions.org for examples of projects and implementation guidance. By pairing smart engineering with the power of nature, the World Bank is working to support countries and make the world a safer and more resilient place.
Great. Now that we've seen this video, I think we can address many socioeconomic and environmental issues at once. However, while NBS are intended to deliver these benefits for everyone, in some cases, groups, and for example, of those benefits. To give an example, in urban areas, safety concerns may arise when, for instance, women and girls are not feeling safe using open green spaces or urban forests in later hours of the day. So in order to understand and address correctly this type of interventions, context is absolutely key. This is for all NBS, but especially when it comes to understanding how to make them inclusive. So a lot of consideration needs to be given to the context, even more so when we're talking about countries and communities in context of fragility, conflict, and violence. In a little bit, we'll talk about how to do this. And then finally, one point that is really important, intersectionality of various aspects of a person's identity can also play a role here. So for instance, we're talking about a disabled woman with physical accessibility challenges, or a young man from a low-income household without employment opportunities. So
Laura, we're having a hard time hearing you.
yeah, is anyone not? Is everyone muted? Is it better now?
Much better, thank you.
So just to finish here, by acknowledging and addressing these elements of intersectionality, NBS can provide inclusive benefits and opportunities for all. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do this, but then a quick note on the methodology that we've used for the guidance note. The note was developed based on desktop research. It used a portfolio review that the Global Program of Nature-Based Solutions did and launched earlier this year in May. As well as a compilation of relevant case studies from the bank and other development partners. To give an idea, this portfolio review showed that 103 projects that had an NBS component between 2012 and 2021. Out of this 103 projects, 67 were gender informed, and those of you that are familiar with the World Bank processes, this means that these projects received a gender tag. Additionally, 65% of these projects also had local community engagement around them. So what we did is that we used the examples of the portfolio throughout the guidance note. So the note is well anchored in what has been trialed, what has been done before, so that we can show these examples in a interesting manner. We have organized the note specifically on the examples by urban, coastal, and forest NBS. These are typologies that are non-exclusive, but for the purpose of the note, we found this distinction of spaces and the way that populations relate to these spaces to be quite useful to understand the type of interventions that these spaces may require. Again, by no means the examples in the note are an exhaustive list of everything that can be done for social inclusion in NBS, but they can provide a starting point for projects to note what has been done previously, how these can be integrated. So here, so that we can fully understand and address who should be involved on NBS implementation, especially those that require specific action for inclusion, the guidance note has proposed 4 steps, which are based on the bank's social inclusion assessment tool and the gender tag methodology to do that. Again, it is really important that these considerations are being thought from the very first stages of the project, from conceptualization development, especially when it comes to design interventions, but also for data collection. So just to give you an idea, the first step that we have here is identifying groups that are at risk of exclusion from socio-economic and environmental benefits. This can be done through different types of participatory mapping, consultation techniques, interviews, workshops, focus group discussions, etc. The second step being understand why these groups are being excluded. So for example, if we find out that in a specific watershed management project, women are being excluded, this analysis can help us identify that, for instance, child caring tasks create time constraints for women, and therefore they're not participating. And this allows us to get to the third step, which is to design actions that can help address these gaps of inclusion. So breaking the barriers and maximizing opportunities for these marginalized groups. So in this example, for instance, we can set targets for representation of women by also organizing meetings in spaces that are child-friendly to allow the participation of these women. And last but not least, of course, is measuring the impact of the design inclusive action. And to do that, we need to make sure that there are metrics that are being monitored from the early stages. So thinking about disaggregating data based on gender, but also ethnicity, religion, age group as well. So all these 4 steps, they provide a general guidance for inclusion in NBS. Of course, it will vary a lot depending on the context. But over the next slides, I will show some examples of how this has been done. And please mute yourself if you're not speaking. So first key consideration that we have here is on knowledge and skills. So inequality in access and opportunities often come because people don't have a specific skill set, a specific training. So for this, it is important to understand from the very beginning if there are groups that need to be trained so that they can have access to same supporting to community engagement activities through grants and targeted trainings. A second point here that we have on considerations, a very important one is on livelihood opportunities, which is also, of course, linked to skill set and income generating activities. So these are, for example, the creation of short-term employment opportunities for groups that are facing high employment. We'll hear more about this example soon during our discussion, but we have a project in Sierra Leone that has created short-term employment opportunities for youth and other vulnerable groups through tree planting and enhancing local biodiversity. Another point important there is on inclusion considerations for long-term and managerial roles. So these can help create more stable income for groups that are often excluded and marginalized. And the third one is also integration of traditional and established activities. So for example, a project that the bank is supporting in Bangladesh is providing management of pre-established coastal and marine fisheries through green infrastructure, making sure that these are sustainable with green technologies for seafood production, but it also prioritizes women for fisheries management. Here we have an example that we have also highlighted in the guidance note, which is the forest sector modernization and coastal resilience enhancement project in Vietnam, which is a project that focuses on coastal communities that are already suffering from erosion and sea level rise from climate change. In these communities, also considerable gender gap has been identified. And therefore, this project seeks to support women in training and employment opportunities to address this gender gap. It has done so through supporting women-led microenterprises with, for instance, tree seedling nurseries, ecotourism that are being led by women, provided targeted capacity development building on sandy soil and mangrove restoration for women. After receiving this trainer, this women have been contracted to carry out planting and tendering activities after that. And this project has also tracked beneficiary satisfaction with a disaggregated based on gender so that we can understand exactly the impact that the project has had on women. Two more key considerations that I wanted to highlight for you here. One being safety, which is a very important one, of course. We want to make sure that NBS can, all the benefits can be extended to all, and for sure they need to address safety concerns so that all spaces are safe for all populations. So, for example, we can make sure that these areas can be safer to girls and women by including public street lighting or even sometimes having security guards after certain hours to address these concerns. But also maintenance there is key to make sure that the spaces have a feeling of safety with, for instance, pruning bushes, making sure that these places look clean and safe for all. The last one that I want to talk about, which is also a very important one, is on enhancing accessibility. So having features like this are very important for persons with disabilities, but also with elderly populations to be able to use and benefit from nature-based solutions. So, for example, including features from the very early stages of a project design is with features such as ramps that can increase accessibility. So there's a project that the bank is supporting also in Vietnam that the bank is engaging elderly persons and persons with disability for the building and rehabilitation of social infrastructure in urban areas, which include green spaces that ensure that design are accessible to the country's increasingly elderly population. So having a lot of features such as ramps and widening walkways in areas for such as green housing. These same concerns can be seen also in coastal areas. So having, if you're talking about ecotourism activities, having ramps that are wide enough that can feature wheelchairs, but also other accessibility considerations is also a way to address this. And a last example that I wanted to show to you is on the case is a project that is not a bank project. This one is a project that's being funded by USAID in Uganda. It's called Sand Cow Project. It's a project in rural areas, and what it does is that it includes adaptive tools and farm layouts such as raising beds for easier weeding and having wider crop rows to feed a wheelchair, so that people that also have physical disabilities can participate, can work in these rural areas as well. So to finish here, as you can see, there's so many paths through which gender and social inclusion can be addressed in NBS projects. These are all extremely contextual, and the way in which inclusion will feature in the project will depend a lot on who are the targeted groups, why and how are these groups being excluded, what is the type of NBS, what type of space is this, what type of constraints do they face. But we hope so that the processes, the examples that we're showing here today, but also that we have on the guidance note, will help address some of these issues and make these solutions even more inclusive going forward. So with this, I'd like to thank you once again for joining, and I'll hand back to Zoe for the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's a great presentation, and you soldiered on in spite of the technical difficulties. I know however many years is it now, 3 years into COVID, and but we're still going. So now I'd like to invite our panelists to join the stage, and I'm really excited to hear from each of them. They represent a range of different organizations and all have hands-on experience in integrating social inclusion and nature-based solutions programs. Okay, so yep, here we are. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. So I'm going to introduce first Sarah Keener, if you want to give a wave. Sarah is a senior social development specialist here at the World Bank, and she leads the social inclusion team within the water global practice, and she provides strategic leadership on issues of social inclusion, gender, and citizen engagement. I'd also like to introduce Michael Liu Song. Hi, Michael. He's a senior employment intensive specialist at ILO, and he leads programs to help governments define their roles in employment creation, and has worked on policies and programs in a range of countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, Central Asia. And then I'd also like to invite Evans Lyndon Baines Johnson. Hi, Evans is the project coordinator for the Environmental Foundation for Africa, which is the NGO partner implementing the community-based restoration and tree planting activities of the World Bank financed Resilient Urban Program in Sierra Leone. So hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Great to have you all. So I'm going to go around and ask you all some questions, and thanks to those of you who've been active in the chat, so feel free, and if we have time, we'll also pull in some of those questions, also to Laura, if you have any for her about the note. So let's start, Sarah, with you, ladies first. So you have worked on several World Bank financed operations, providing strategic leadership in terms of social inclusion, gender equality. And from your experience, could you talk a little bit about, to get us started, about some of the unique opportunities that you see from your work, especially in the water practice, of nature-based solutions and how marginalized populations can benefit from these types of programs?
Sure, and just to maybe also give a little bit of context, I mean, I think one of the things that we also want to highlight is the urgency of this. We see the impacts are unequal in terms of climate change, and at least in the water sector, we're seeing really dramatic impacts in places like Sudan, where you have recurrent flooding, has increased gender-based violence significantly in the last years, has a huge number of effects. So we're not going as fast as we need to, and this report makes a really important contribution. So I want to thank you and the team for that. We look forward to working on it. I think there are a lot of key opportunities in terms of combining not only looking or addressing inclusion in our operations is important, but how it also gets us to more sustainable outcomes. So, we talk about some of the impacts of climate change and mitigating them through green jobs, right? Which is a really important thing when you look at some of the large shifts in the labor force that are happening because of drought and flooding in our case. But this requires really looking at some of the structural inequalities and addressing them. So, for example, in the China Ecological Restoration Project, which is a very large project focused on reducing pollution, reducing plastics pollutions at source, the client was creating river chiefs, system of river chiefs, to help manage that resource at the local level. And by introducing not only a gender quota, by first raising the awareness of the fact that there was an issue in terms of who was actually represented, who was asked for those jobs, they now have, within, I think, in the last year or so, created 300,000 new female river chiefs. So, but it took a while to get to that point. I think the other, there are many areas, but other key areas is in urban areas, combining sort of participatory green infrastructure with community development not only can help promote social cohesion, but it can also raise awareness and help shift behavior. And at the same time, addressing some of the inequities like higher rates of asthma in poorer neighborhoods, lack of shade, poor water quality for downstream communities. And on that point, one of the other opportunities we don't talk about very much, but we've been working quite a lot in the World Bank on how you create communities around shared water resources. And I'm talking a lot about water because I'm from the water sector, but it's not only water, this is done in other ways. And one of the opportunities that brings is by focusing on those communities around that shared resource, you break down some of the barriers, right? You bring upstream and downstream communities together, and those are often very diverse. So we see this in places like the Middle East, an organization called EcoPeace Middle East, which has worked really effectively with Palestinians, Israelis, and Jordanians to improve the quality of water management, the quality, and some of them also including nature-based solutions. But it's really worked at the community level to connect those communities so they have a shared view, and that's actually had really important contributions not only to promoting greater cohesion among these communities, but also to addressing the inclusion issue. I'll stop there. I know there's many other things we're going to talk about, but just the last part of this is we have seen, the data shows that when you have greater diversity, greater voice in particular of women, you do have more sustainable outcomes. If we don't include these communities, we're not going to get to behavior change, among other things, and we're going to see big impacts. So, this is just fantastic work, and I think our question really is, how do we scale it up? How do we go much faster? Thank you.
No, thank you, Sarah. And I think it's a great point to, kick off with the other panelists too, just that this is a development issue. It's not about being nice or doing the right thing. It's really about making sure that all different parts of society benefit from these types of investments. And yeah, I agree. We have to move more quickly and do more. So I'm going to turn out Michael. Hi, Michael. I'm going to turn to you. And so the ILO recently co-authored a report on decent work in nature-based solutions last year in 2022. And it talks a lot about it includes more information and knowledge around the role of nature-based solutions in creating employment opportunities. So can you talk a bit more about this report and the findings and what types of decent work opportunities did you uncover in your research, especially for the poorest and most marginalized communities?
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Zoe, and good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody here. Yes, so we did this report. It was together with IUCN and UNEP. So it's a collaboration between the three organizations. And I think on this question, I think we have both good news and bad news, so to speak. And I think on the good news side, I think what we found is, if you look at absolute numbers globally, the bulk of people working on NBS qualify in some level as what we call marginalized, whether they're low income, small farmers, indigenous peoples, etc. So this was one important finding. On the other hand, and those of us who are involved in implementation probably know part of the answer. A lot of the work involved is kind of manual labor. So this is one reason why these people are involved, because it's low wage work, which brings us to the other point, is that in terms of the quality of the work involved, there are real gaps in many areas. And I think this is one area that the report tries to highlight, to say, yes, there's a potential to create jobs, but let's try and make these jobs as good as possible. Of course, taking out the context in which these projects operate. So So we have to be realistic, but at the same time kind of be ambitious about what the quality of jobs we can have. Now, it's interesting also that a lot of these jobs are created through what we call special interventions, so to speak. Either the projects, some of them go to public works or public employment programs that work in this space. We see a lot of work related to payment for ecosystem services programs, which are not necessarily employment, but do expect people to do some work in return for some payment. So you're definitely where the line of employment ends and it starts, and then you go all the way to some programs which have more of a social protection focus, but still require some level of effort or time of input from participants to qualify. So it's almost like it's a conditional transfer with some level of effort or work required expected. So there's a whole plethora of these types of interventions, and we see many people involved in that. And I think what we're trying to say is like, how do we improve this? How do we think of this when it's work more as work, and how do we bring in those measures, whether it's sometimes around occupational health and safety, where we know that some of this work can be dangerous, people can get injured. Can we think about this? In some cases, can there be some level of appropriate social protection or linking those people to those measures and programs that are there? And an important issue that I wanted to perhaps, which came out quite strongly, is this the question around volunteering, where we also saw there's a lot of volunteering in around NBS, and it's often framed around, well, the benefits of this NBS are going to accrue to this community or to this group of people, and so there is expectation that they should volunteer part of their time or work for a lower wage than normal because they're going to get those benefits anyway, etc. And I think our view is that we need to be careful about this. We're not saying, or I think we should all quite think about carefully. It's not about saying we should not have volunteering. I think that's not the message, but let's think carefully about if we ask poor marginalized people to volunteer for something, under what conditions do we expect them to do so? When there's a pothole in my road, I'm not asked to volunteer to fill it, but it's to my benefit as well. So let's be clear about that, and I think that was I think an important message that came out. The other and the final point maybe is that there was also, I think, positive messages coming out in terms of that there is a lot of new work emerging also in this space. So you have biodiversity monitors and people who are doing kind of new occupations that are, and I think there is a space for innovation. There's a space for higher quality, more skilled, more productive work. And I think here the question is, how do we also encourage or enable marginalized groups to participate in that trajectory, that they are also going to benefit from the kind of higher skilled and more productive opportunities that are emerging. So let me kind of pause there and back to you, Zoe. Thanks.
No, thanks so much, Michael. Really interesting. And yeah, the volunteer point is, I think, an important one. And this is also something beyond NBS, but making sure that especially communities and women and others are recognized for work and are fairly compensated and have opportunities for better training and employment opportunities. So it's really good to also hear that you're looking into that as well in the NBS space. So now I'm going to move on to Evans. Evans, come back. In a second, we'll move on to Evans. I think he was having some difficulties with his connection. Oh, there you are. Hi, Evans. Can you hear
Hello,
me?
how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
You get me clear? Oh, good, good, good. I'm good.
Great. No, thanks for being here. So I wanted to ask you, as you are currently coordinating and supervising the implementation of the community-based tree planting and restoration activities in the Resilient Urban Sierra Leone project, if you could talk a bit about your experience, give us some information on what type of employment, nature-based solutions related employment that you have been, or the program has been offering in terms of restoration programs, and how you've been able to target youth or women and other vulnerable groups under this project. So Evans, if it helps, you can also turn your video off. I'm not sure with the connection. You froze.
You hear me?
Yep, can hear you now. You unfroze. Oh, you froze again. Maybe if you want to try turning off your video.
I think you might be joining by another way. Just saw that.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. Okay, Evans. I see he's still here. Oh, you're back. It's exciting. Do you hear us? We hear you, kind of. Evans?
Yes. Hello, Sarah.
Hi.
Yes.
Please go ahead. Okay, maybe if it doesn't work, we can go. Oh,
Okay.
hi.
He might want to try the call-in option.
Okay. Maybe Brendan or Laura, can I ask you guys to get in touch with Evans? And then we'll move on and come back to him when he connects.
Yes, let's move on now. Let's wait for him to reconnect. We'll send
Okay.
a message.
Great, thank you. Okay, so maybe it's very exciting. So maybe then we can move on and we'll come back to Evans once he reconnects. But the next set of, the next set of questions or area that we wanted to have a bit of a discussion around was on design features and lessons around making nature-based solution programs more gender informed and socially socially inclusive. So maybe this time, Michael, I'll start with you. Is that okay? Surprise.
Sure, yeah, that's fine.
So Michael, we all know that marginalized groups tend to have limited potential. And then oftentimes it results in them being less considered for employment opportunities. It's harder for them to find good work, right, that pays them well. And as you were saying before, that's safe. So what are some of the necessary requirements or prerequisites that you think should be considered in, project or program designs, formulations for NBS programs to help strengthen their potential for decent employment in nature-based solution programs?
Sure. So a few things here. So I think we all know, that inclusion in terms of the planning and decision making is critical. We all know it's very difficult. This partially also brings me back to the point on volunteering, that this dimension of inclusion, consulting with communities, planning work together, etc., is quite time intensive. And again, one should not expect your communities to take this facilitation role up and for free, or see that as something, let's think about that part as work as well. It's important for the success of the project. One needs to involve them, one needs to in that planning. So that's, I think, one important. I think also there is, in the decision-making process, and I think this is maybe coming to the guide, which is not so clear on this, but before we start something saying it should be an NBS, there's also consultation around that, because there are trade-offs in NBS. I mean, the classic one is around tree, do we plant indigenous trees or more commercial, interesting trees? Communities may have the one, and for many people in NBS, that's a critical difference between the two. If you use, non-indigenous trees, which you call it NBS. So there are complexities there, and involving communities into that part as well to say, well, is this going to be NBS, or, do we want to stick to all these kind of standards or goals or ambitions that NBS have, and being part of that discussion, I think is really important. I think those are two which, in addition to, I think the guide, yes, talks about skills and training. I think it's important, again, that there is, in many communities, local and indigenous knowledge around this. So many communities will tell you NBS is nothing new. We've been doing this for a long time. And often, on the other hand, this is true, but also not completely true, because there are new things to NBS sometimes. There are specific requirements we introduce. So it's a joint learning exercise. So the skills training, we shouldn't see it as something that comes from the project implementers that we're just going to train these communities who are lost. It's about what do they know, and where do we need to add fill gaps? Where do we need to add skills? What is it? And that, again, is harder. It takes more time. It takes more consultation. It takes more planning. But I think these are all the things that, if we want to make it work in the long term, I think that's really important. Because if the communities don't want indigenous trees, they want fruit trees, it's not going to work, right? I mean, the moment we leave, they're going to take the trees and plant fruit trees. So we have to be, we have to make these investments. I think these investments in consultation, the investments in sharing knowledge, the investments in training, if we want to really, go all the way in terms of inclusion. So I think that, yeah, on that, that's what I wanted to add. Thanks.
No, thanks. I think that's an important point too on sustainability, the importance of inclusion, to make sure whatever investment is sustainable and you don't pull out the trees that were planted because that wasn't your choice. And so I think that's great. Evans, you're back. Hi, Evans. Can you hear me?
Hi, Sarah. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Hey, great. So did you hear the question I had asked you before?
Will you please repeat that again?
I will. Okay. So Evans, you're currently coordinating and supervising the implementation of the community-based tree planting and restoration activities, as you know, which is part of the World Bank financed Resilient Urban Sierra Leone project. So linked to Michael's point about trees, good. So if you could talk a little bit about the type of employment offered through these types of restoration activities that you're managing, and how the program has been able to engage with and target youth and women and other vulnerable groups. I hope you heard that time.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you here and share my thoughts and experiences of what we've been doing as part of the, we call it the Tree Town campaign. It's actually a campaign that is predicated mainly on the use of nature-based solutions to address climate resilience. The name itself, Freetown the Tree Town, originates from what Freetown used to be 20 or 30 years ago, surrounded by lush vegetation and provided the space for an area of biodiversity. But between 1991 and 2002, the country experienced a civil war, which led to massive rural-urban migration. And as a result, Freetown was originally built for 500,000 people. But over the past 20 years or so, Freetown had overpopulated. Freetown has been overpopulated with now a population of 1.2 million. So you can imagine the stress that has on the built environment and the natural environment as well. So Freetown has had its fair share of disaster, climate-induced risk and disasters. So we've experienced flooding, frequent floodings in the past 5 years. We experienced landslides in the past 5 years, and extreme heat. So with all these, to address this climate resilience for vulnerable communities in Freetown,
Evans, I think you're breaking up quite a bit.
the project Freetown, the Freetown was birthed. And so this aims to use that, but in comprehensive and calculated approach, not only address climate disasters, but also youth employment. And so for the next solutions, we sought to plant and grow trees in Freetown and the Western Area Peninsula to address flooding, landslides, stress, and erosion, which is in
Evans,
huge
could you
disasters
maybe
in the
turn
city.
off your
So how
video? We have a hard time hearing.
we that to plan disasters these communities by identifying first one to yes, get me now?
Evans, it's really bad. It's breaking up a lot. I don't know if you can turn
Am I
off your
am I
video.
through?
It's like coming in and out. Can you try turning off your video? It might help.
Hello?
Hi.
Can you get me?
This is better now, yes. No, we can hear you. I was just suggesting to turn off your
Yes,
video.
can you get me? I
Yep.
continue.
I got you. We got you.
Yes, hello, can I? Yes, can you get me now?
Yep.
Okay, all right.
Yep. So maybe,
All right.
Evans,
Is it clear
you
now?
want to, yep. If you want to just say a few more points and then wrap up, and we'll come back to you again.
There's also the options of him having the call-in function, if that's any better, if his phone line's any better.
Audible?
Okay, Evans, maybe we'll come back to you because it was getting very hard to hear. Oh, okay.
Yes, my video is off now. Can you get? Can you get me now?
Kind of. Maybe if you want to just say a couple points and
good.
try.
So,
Okay.
so targeted youth in climate communities. Yes, it's gone off now. Yes, so we targeted youth in these communities to take part in the tree planting. And so our model and project metrics for to get 80% trees by and then other.
Okay, Evans, I think we're gonna move on because we can't hear you. So maybe if you want to work and try and connect, as Sarah suggested, by phone, we could try that. But it's really hard to hear, I'm sorry. Okay, so Sarah, I'm gonna come to you now, if that's okay. We're going back now on the design features of nature-based solutions and how to, better integrate social inclusion. So as we heard also from Laura and from Bernice, the World Bank has ramped up its investment in nature-based solution programs and components into projects it's financing, linked to disaster risk reduction, ecological services, resilient livelihoods. So what are, putting on your hat now as a team lead, what are some of the gender equality and socially inclusive actions that you think project managers should be considering or be aware of when they're designing and implementing these types of programs to build risk reduction and to improve livelihoods?
Sure. Thanks, Zoe. I'm sorry we could not hear your colleague. I hope that gets resolved. I think so. One of the first things, and this doesn't sound like it's only about inclusion, but it actually is investing. We often in the didactic tools that can democratize access to information on nature-based solutions. And we often focus a lot on our higher level modeling, particularly with water resource management, flood management, can be a very technical issue. But the question is who actually gets access to the information on things like flooding, on things like water quality, on things like what affects it. And further, who actually, when we talk about participatory processes to design nature-based solution, who actually people don't understand it's a fairly complex issue, right, of interconnectivity of some of these things, of the benefits of nature-based solutions and of the cumulative impacts of what different people are doing or intervening on a given environment, then they can't actually opt for those solutions. So there is a proclivity sometimes among government counterparts for gray solutions. There's a lot of reasons for that. And what we're really talking about here in part is how do you tap into the potential benefits of nature-based solutions, and particularly the benefits for marginalized groups. So one example in terms of the devils in the details and what we have been putting increasingly into our operations are the resources to really think about how do you democratize access to that information. And I'll give you one example. The other thing we talk a lot about in water is whole of society approaches, right? This is how do you empower civil society and citizens to take action themselves? How do you empower government to engage citizens? How do you empower citizens to engage government and things like advocacy? So one example, we've been doing a stock take, but one example that I found quite interesting is something called the Natural Solutions Tool, created by the Chicago Watershed Alliance and Trust for Public Land. You might know it, Zoe. But essentially what it allows anybody to do is take a given parcel of land, if they're considering a nature-based solution or their intervention, and provide real-time data on the health impacts on things like water quality downstream, on the equity impacts. So for example, if you're planting in trees in one particular area, it might have this impact on asthma versus another. And on the biodiversity impact. And it takes all of the data that we tend to focus on in our planning, but makes it accessible to anybody in real time. Tells you also what type of materials you should be using in that particular area if you want to mitigate flood and so forth. And that is the type of thing which we are increasingly trying to learn from also outside the bank. How can we, as we build data systems, do that in the bank? do that in our projects. I think that, and in a way that creates a tool for really understanding very concretely what is the equity impact of doing it here versus here versus here. I think second is, we have to consider the underlying drivers and structural inequality. So nature-based solutions take up a lot of land. We know that there are issues with women's access, and also not only women, but also Indigenous persons' access to land tenure and land title. And so if you are just organizing, let's say, consultations, we have to understand that the weight of women, that even if you have a nice consultation, the weight of their voice is not going to be the same because they don't actually have land titles. So sometimes we've got to go deeper and look at the underlying issues. So we're doing this, for example, in our water and agriculture work, where we're really looking at how do we learn from some of the other practices on getting greater voice. And the same is true with Indigenous populations. We just had an event at the UN where we had Indigenous leaders from 4 different continents come together and talk specifically about, what do you do when you don't have the water rights? So how do you engage equally in that conversation or that consultation or that determination of what's going to be done? And I think that brings me to my third point, which is part of it then requires looking at the institutions. So we talk a lot about inclusion, but what we actually have to do is look at what are the institutional processes and incentives for that inclusion and really focus on that. And towards that end, just as an example, we know that I think it was the climate group that analysis showed that there's only 62 women for every 100 men are considered to have green talent. So we're starting from behind. If you want women to have green jobs, it's not just about making the job available, it's about really understanding that whole ecosystem. And towards that end, by looking at institutions, in the water practice, we've been looking at the diversity of the institutions themselves through a program called Equal Aqua, where it's a systematic framework to break down where is the binding constraint. That's turned into benchmarking with the largest global database. And we are increasingly looking at how can we apply this to disaster risk management organizations. Where is the data? Do we know what it is? And that getting very professional about that is where we're starting to go. And I think there's a lot of room for us to go further. Last point is incentives. So what are the incentives for some of these communities to benefit? There's examples like the Bolivia water shared agreements, which connects upstream and downstream communities. And that's actually initiated by civil society, but then they work with municipal governments. And that helps to get around some of the inherent power structures that you're going to have if you're just having consultation with government. So I think increasingly, and that's been effective at scaling things up. There's, I think, over around 80 local Indian governments have adapted such agreements. So focusing on those 4 aspects, I think, is what's key in terms of how do we, the devil's in the detail. So how do we get beyond the intention to really looking at the results? And the last point, which you bring out in your paper, is having the feedback loops often when we looked at our own projects, and I think you had the similar finding, which is we have a lot of good verbiage on inclusion, but the projects it's really interesting to see where are we actually going back and seeing if that happen and understanding why. We're starting to track that more systematically we do an annual report card in water, and we're starting to really track that, so we get our own feedback loop going on it.
No, great. Thank you. I think that's really important too. And again, it links back to Michael's point as well in sustainability and making sure that we see the results of all of these investments are having the impact that we intended, right? That everyone did. So unfortunately, Evans, the connection problems are so severe, I don't think he's going to be able to join. But I did want to ask Brendan just to say a couple words because he's also familiar with the program in Freetown. Just to give a little bit of the context of sort of the
I am
elements.
here. Can you hear me?
Oh, Evans. Hi, Evans.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay,
yes, I'm
you want
here.
to try?
Yes. So just to be quick, I was explaining about the process of
in which we got the youths. So we got them through the community engagement and when they volunteered and they were trained. So our nature-based solution was actually using digital technology to grow trees. And so that was the model we used. It's called the paper grow model. So youths were assigned to plant and grow trees and get incentives when they track the trees. So the tracking of the trees is taking a digital photo of the tree, uploading it in the online platform, and then there is a verification process of the numbers of trees you
Evans, it was going so well. Okay. That was exciting there for a minute. I don't know, Brendan, did you want to compliment?
Is also still something to do on the digital inclusion side of things.
Did you want to add quickly, and hopefully Evans surprises us a third time and comes back?
I mean, nothing to take away from Evans, and I said I haven't worked on the Evans. No.
Yes, I am here. Can you get me? I'm actually explaining something.
You're back.
Yes, can you get me?
Perfect.
I am getting you clearly.
Please go ahead.
So like I was saying, we have been able to create jobs for 1,079 youths. 1,079 youths have got jobs planting and growing trees. And 43% of that number are women. And mainly they're getting their payment through mobile money. So once they track trees and they get these trees are verified on an online platform and they receive payments. And because of this system, we've been able to get an 80% tree survival rate. So over the past 2 years, of these trees are growing. And so again, we want to understand how these trees are planted. So we identified 4 land use typologies where we are planting these trees. We are planting trees in the roadsides as part of the urban beautification. We're also planting critical dams in the communities, and we are also planting trees in communities and neighborhoods. So we encourage people in and around their homes to plant trees, and these trees are digitally tracked. We have an online platform where we can see the growth of these trees, and these trees are tracked every 2 months. So once these growers, these community youths track these trees every 2 months and demonstrate growth, they receive payments. And that's how we've been able to roll out and have an 80% tree survival rate because of it has also been economically and genderly inclusive.
Okay, Evans, I think we lost you again. Wait a second. No. Okay, well, I think that's too bad. At least we did get a good flavor and heard a bit about the technology and that it seems to be working quite well, no, both in terms of targeting youths as well as the survival rate of the trees, as well as even that it's a bit the gender informed aspects of it, that you do have a high percentage of women also participating in the program. So that's quite encouraging. And I think it'll be interesting to track that and see, eventually as throughout the project lifespan, if that's able to continue and to be scaled up. And of course, lessons for other countries and other cities and what can be replicable. So before we go to our closing speaker, I wanted to just give our panel the opportunity. Any last words from Sarah, from Michael? Evans might pop up again. Let's see. But if you want to share any last parting thoughts.
Do you want to call on us, Zoe, or where do you want us to go?
Go ahead, Sarah. No, I was just going to see if either of you. Go ahead, Sarah.
Sure. No, I mean, I think, just going back to the devil's in the details, and it requires more than an intention to be inclusive. We need to look at institutions. We need to look at social norms. We need to look at sustainability, but also we need to really invest in the practical tools for doing this, and the types of processes for doing it. And I think one of the things that's been really useful, and I think we look forward to doing more, is how do we work together across practices, urban, DRM, water, climate. We have a lot of, I think, exciting work ahead in terms of how we pool. We've done in water a stock take on participation in water resources management, which covers many of these tools, and also would be glad to share that and work together with others on it. So very much looking forward how we accelerate this.
Thanks, Sarah. Michael, anything?
Yes, can you hear me again?
Hey, Evans, do you have any last points before I go to Michael, since it seems we can hear you? I have to give you an A for effort, though, Evans. You've definitely tried really hard, and I'm sorry the connectivity is so bad. A plus. Go ahead, Michael. Sorry. You're muted.
Okay, now I also have my challenges. No, no, it's a pity that Evans couldn't share more, actually, because this project is also a case study in the report we did, and I think it's interesting in that it shows the kind of also the other side of the new work and the new, because setting up this whole system of tracking trees through apps and keeping it going, creates a whole new space of work and innovation, etc., which I think is kind of the really exciting part of where the opportunities for work in NBS lie. So yeah, but I think otherwise I think just want to thank everybody.
Yeah, so
I'm putting the link to the report in the app in the chat, so if anybody's interested. And I see, and I'll give back to you, Zoe, to see how you manage this.
It's always
Thanks.
exciting. Thank you. No, great. Thank you both. Evans, it sounds like you might be back. Are you here?
yes, I'm here.
Okay. Did you want to say?
So yes, so I just wanted to clarify some issues which I may have waked up on. So one of the most important lessons that we've been able to learn using nature-based solutions and the pay-per-grow model is accountability. So for the number of trees we've been able to get surviving, have actually been dependent on the incentives youths receive in the communities. Before the project, most of the youths were reliant on the forest for livelihoods, either burning of charcoal or wood, whatever tree they see around they cut. But because they now have incentives for growing these trees, we are now seeing that fallow lands are now being youths are taking care of trees like they take care of babies, because once they track these trees, every 2 months they receive payments on their mobile phones. We did not only plant trees, we also planted mangrove areas, because Freetown has coastal wetlands where people have invaded to build houses. So community youth go collect propagules, plant them, and we are now seeing in the 6 communities we've piloted the mangrove planting, we're now seeing that the area is being regenerated. So Freetown, the Tree Town, and the components of actually creating green jobs have seen a lot of improvements in most areas. Places are exposed now to erosion. that particular piece. So we keep this going. The lessons learned is, if we get youths, train them. And another thing we did was training these youth, not only giving them jobs, but training them in climate education and climate awareness. So most of the communities we operate in, we have trained people we call climate action ambassadors. So these diversify climate narratives in the communities, in not just trees as well. So there is that climate. And also, they have now been trained themselves to identify climate risks and see how they can be mitigated. So the idea of tree planting is something that is now grown, is electing to plant at least a tree, grass, or shrub in and around their compounds voluntarily. So this is also another thing that we've learned. And in terms of the tree species selection, we've been able to get communities and private properties to plant fruit trees as an incentive for them to take care of these trees. When they grow, they have economic livelihood or fruits from these trees. So we have also succeeded mainly because of the tree species selection we planted. We planted ornamental trees, for instance, on the roadsides, and they're doing well. We planted high nitrogen trees and fruit-bearing trees in the forest to attract wildlife and biodiversity. So these are all things that we've been able to try. It's something new, but it's
Okay, thank you, Evan. So that actually came through pretty clearly. So it was good to get a better sense of the program. Really interesting. And yeah, so we shared in the chat as well a summary, a case study also about the project for those who are interested. So with that, I want to thank all of our panelists. Again, Evan's A for effort on with the technological difficulties. Thank you for joining, everyone. So now I'd actually like to invite our closing speaker to give a few remarks, Victoria Schreider, who is advisor on sustainable development and finance at the Austrian Federal Ministry of Finance. Hi, Victoria.
Hi, Zoe.
Over to you, please.
Thanks a lot. Just to say that it's been really a pleasure to join today's presentation and to hear from practitioners from the World Bank, from the ILO, and also from Evans, at least some interesting glimpses on the project from the Environmental Foundation for Africa. Really interesting to hear, especially from an employment lens, the connection between nature-based solutions and gender and social inclusion. I think hearing from all of you on the panel, all of you experts, really helps us better understand the importance of integrating socially inclusive employment opportunities and ensuring design features address the needs of marginalized groups when planning and implementing nature-based solutions interventions. And in particular, I took away three points from today's session. The first one is that inclusion really creates opportunities for marginalized groups in the NBS context. And these projects really provide avenues to benefit from disaster risk reduction interventions that can also reduce vulnerability to natural hazards and improve well-being. Second point that I'd like to mention is that integrating inclusion into NBS projects is challenging and really requires sustained efforts. I think we've heard a lot about these efforts, and there are really good examples in the guidance note as well. So I encourage everyone who hasn't done so to really take a look at the guidance note. Super interesting hands-on examples. And the third point that I'd like to make is that context is really important. That's something that Zoe mentioned at the beginning as well. We can really learn from the experience of other projects through knowledge sharing and building partnerships. And this is really important to advance this agenda further. And with that, sincere gratitude to all the speakers. Thanks to GFDR for organizing this wonderful event, for all of you for being active on this agenda and advancing this agenda. As a member of GFDR, Austria is really looking forward to working with the World Bank on advancing this agenda, on working on both nature-based solutions and gender and social inclusion topics, and really looking forward to to learning more and to put knowledge into practice. So thanks again to everyone for joining.
Thank you so much, Victoria. And so good top 3 takeaways. But I want to thank everyone for coming. And we will follow up. So we did record this event, and we will share the PowerPoint that Laura gave. Michael shared the link to the ILO guidance note. We've also shared the link to the guidance note that GFDR has prepared. So I think it really, hopefully we'll be able to come together and apply. That's the key, right? And as Sarah said, it's urgent. We need to start applying this more as we go, sharing the information across partners, and especially with our colleagues working across other, in other sectors, water, environment, not only in the DRM side, right? So really, thanks so much to you all, and looking forward to continuing the dialogue. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Bye.